warm welcome to our Independence Day special right here on Brand Equity with me, Sonali Krishna. India at 73 poses a lot of questions. And birthdays are usually a good time to reflect, introspect, and acknowledge what we've become. A nation is no different. Today, over the next 30 minutes, I'm going to be joined by some of the sharpest minds of the country who will bring to the fore their observations of how this country has changed. The objective of this conversation is to highlight and articulate who we have become and what India at 73 stands for. Is this a new India? Is it very different from the India in 1947 or for that matter, even 2010? And what are her key brand attributes? How is she viewed by her internal and external stakeholders? And is this the path she envisaged when she took birth in 1947? Well, without further ado, let me introduce to you my panel of intellectuals: Santosh Desai, social commentator; Rama Bijapurkar, one of India's eminent thought leaders on India's consumer economy; and Professor Shiv Visvanathan, one of India's top sociologists. Truly a pleasure having you this Independence Day on ET Now. Let me start with you, Santosh, on your headline thoughts of India at 73. And if I asked you to personify India, what would be some of the key adjectives you would attribute to India today?
Well, I think, as always, you would describe it in some form of paradoxes, as a paradox. So I think at one level, India today is I think, in a real sense, particularly when you look at it from a consumption lens, much more democratic kind of a space. Consumption, there is a much greater kind of a devolution of voice and kind of a sense of self that we are seeing at the grassroots level, in one sense. At another sense, we are also seeing an India where democratic institutions are kind of silent and silenced. So I think we are seeing this paradox of democratization of a kind that is taking place, sitting together with almost an anesthetized kind of a view.
Okay. Fair enough. Rama, in line with Santosh, or a completely different view?
So I would say fragmented. It's almost kaleidoscopic. Every time you shake your hand a little bit, it's a whole new pattern. So it's fragmented, multivarianted. If you use the brand language. Confusing. I would not say confused, because to the individual constituents who hold different views, it's fairly clear. And the common thread, I would say, is assertion. Assertion externally, assertion internally, assertion. That's what I would say.
Okay. And Shiv?
Well, I would say three things. It's confused, but its confusion is what saves it. It's paradoxical, but doesn't know how to solve paradoxes. And thirdly, it's dualistic. And that what it creates there is a kind of violence which we have never seen before. And I think that's the new factor, violence. So we are confused, confident, but strangely emerging as one of the most violent societies I know. Okay,
fair enough. Santosh, are you in agreement with Shiv? And if you're not, please feel free to tell me why. And especially when he talks about violence, and he's saying that this has become one of our new attributes, which we've not seen earlier. Would you be in agreement with that? And B, if I had to ask you, would you say, compare, let's say, the first 1947 and 2020, would you say we've become a much more religious society? Or would you say that we were always a religious society? Has religion become much more important to us than it was in the past as a culture?
So I think the first part of it, I think in terms of violence, I think violence in many forms, I think certainly we do see. And I think I'll link it to what Rama said about a new kind of an assertiveness that we are seeing. And I think what we are seeing, particularly in the last few years, is an assertiveness that is not necessarily backed by, there was a time when India did emerge in a sense as a center of growth. And there was a new kind of an energy, certainly in many kind of areas. And today what one is seeing is a discernible slowing down of that energy at one level, at the collective level, at a national level. And yet simultaneously a rise in assertiveness and a sense of a pride that seems to sort of, in a sense, convert almost anything into an act of pride, and which is asserted in a very forceful way. And that is the kind of violence I certainly see that underpins a lot of what we are doing. On when it comes to religion, I don't think we have become a more religious country. It's just that we are using religion perhaps more overtly in a political sense. But in a sense, India has always been a deeply religious country. That religion has been embedded into our cultural practices, in so many different ways, in many ways that are invisible to us. But I don't think that the fundamental shift is the fact that India has become a more religious country. It is simply that the meaning of religion and the use of religion has changed.
Okay, so can you highlight how religion and its connotation has changed, let's say in the past and now in its current avatar?
Yes, because I think in a sense, if you look at the fact that, in a larger sense, I think what we are seeing much more is a very active use of very shallow symbols. So what we are seeing is religion being converted to its most sort of a visible symbol. So you reduce what is as it is a very vast and a sort of a complex sort of a religious practice into as simplified and codified a form as possible, so that it can be used and recirculated.
Right. Rama, I want to, push a little bit more, taking a cue from what Santosh says. I mean, you may or may not be in agreement with what he said, especially in the bit he talked about pride. And my question is in relation to pride and the sudden sense of pride or forced pride or forced nationalism that one sees or is asked to cultivate within oneself. Do you think this is something new? I mean, you all have been, around much longer than I have, but I don't think in the past I have been forced to wear my nationalism or my patriotism on my sleeve. And if I didn't do that, I was not an outcast, but today I might be. Is this something new, or do you think this has been also, pervasive all through?
As far as pride is concerned, I think Sare Jahan Se Acha was always there, right? I remember when the first Indian went on that moon mission with the Russians, and Indira Gandhi asked him, "Kaise dikhta hai aapko wahan se?" And he said, "Sare jahan se acha." Okay, I think the standing up for the national anthem, stuff like that was always there. I think the propaganda that we went through, Desh ke liye shakkar mat khao, ration hai, ye hai, wo hai. I think the mahol and the circumstances just made you far, far, far more conscious that you were a citizen of something larger. I think now you can go into your gated community and not really care. You can think you're in America. I have a friend who calls it the RNI, the resident non-Indian, not the NRI. So I don't know that anybody's punishing anybody for not being proud of their country anymore. I think the only difference, and it applies to religion, it applies to violence, it applies to pride, is that you have so many more trolls and so much more on internet, right?
Fair enough. Shiv, would you be in agreement with this with the nationalism bit, or do you think we have been asked as protocol to become, more nationalist?
The only way to be proud of our country today is to be anti-national. I think you have to understand something. Nationalism was plural. Our national movement was one of the most cosmopolitan movements ever. But the nation state marches in uniform. And today, as a country, we officially march in uniform. Nationalism had a sense of defeated cultures, marginal cultures, diversity. But the nation state won't allow for dissent. And I think this is what we have to understand. Because of the nation state, religion has become ideological, which allows a lot of mental policing, moral policing. And I think this is what we have to understand, that the nation state today is an organized form of violence. It's developmental violence, it's scientific violence, and it has a kind of religious communal violence. And I think we have to grasp it. I think a lot of us who feel we are outside the nation state are quite relaxed about it. But today, I think the only religion we have is patriotism. And I can't think of anything more fake than that.
Fair enough. Santosh, just to take that forward, when you talk about India at 73, and let's say juxtapose it with, India at 50 and India, let's say, 20 years into birth, what would you see the stark differences? And I'm not going to ask you to say, whether it's evolution or regression just yet, but what would you say is starkly different, where there has been a dramatic shift in the way we present ourselves internally to our own citizens, to you and me, and of course, the way India is looked at, externally?
Well, I think one of the big differences, of course, is the fact that, I think there is a much greater sense of pride, which is something we've already talked about. I think there is this posture of pride, which is both at the external and internal level. You're seeing this.
Can I just stop you there for a moment? When you say posture of pride, I just want to dig a little deeper. Is this pride misplaced? Is it forced pride, or is it really something we feel from within? Because what do we have to show for this pride?
I think certainly 20 years, from a 20-year perspective, I certainly think it's not as if there is nothing to show. I certainly think there is something to show. And that's where I would, for the moment, because we've talked about this at a sort of an aggregate level. So if I sort of dig down a little, I certainly think at the level of the individual, there has been a significant change. And I think there is a significant sense of coming into oneself and the self as a project, I think is something that you see much more sort of widely kind of practiced. The idea, you're seeing this whole, the great interest in self-transformation that we are seeing, as we travel across the country. You're seeing sort of enormous amount of creativity, particularly in the last few years, as the means of expression have got democratized. So there are certainly many, many changes that have taken place at the grassroots level. At a collective level, when we think of ourselves as in terms of a country, that's where I think the pride has an element which I think is certainly linked to the kind of change that we have seen, and yet there is a determination to be proud. So which regardless of what the reality might be, that determination is an extra layer that we are seeing, which has developed in the last few years, which goes up over and above what might be a natural kind of an evolution that everybody has seen in their lives and has reason to feel good about. I think over and above that, there is this veneer, there is this which increasingly is coloring many other things.
Rama, would you be in agreement? And, even Shekhar Gupta talked about this, and it's his viewpoint as well. I would be in agreement, but let me know what you think. Is this growing culture that we have now as the norm of bhakti? So we have this bhakti cult happening. And, we've always been a land of hero worship. We've hero worshipped our actors, we've hero worshipped our cricketers, but have we ever hero worshipped our politicians? And is this something new that we're seeing, or would you say this has been happening in spurts, over the years in our journey?
You were clearly born after Nehru, after Gandhiji, after Indira Gandhi, even after, to some extent, Rajiv Gandhi maybe. But Indira Gandhi, it was very common to see visuals of people diving straight for her feet. Nobody thought that was strange. Okay, right now you say, oh my God, look at this and look at that. If I think about, my father's most prized possession was a photograph of Gandhiji, where if you paid 10 rupees in those days, Gandhiji gave it to you. And then his biggest thing was, I saw Gandhiji, and that's what made him the hero more than anything else he did. So I remember the day Nehru died, and my uncle came back, and my mother said, why are you back early from court? And he said, Nehru died, and the entire neighborhood was in mourning. So I think we've always defied our politicians. Our politicians are our mai-baps. And when a politician tries to be CEO of his state instead of mai-bap, he loses his election.
So would you say that the politics of today versus the politics of yesterday, whether it be Nehru, Indira, whoever in between, are the same kind, and the kind of hero worship you see today is akin to what you've seen earlier?
There are no heroes today. We have a regime
Modi is not a hero?
No, you've got manufactured heroes. You've got designer leaders. You don't have charisma. Nehru had charisma. Ghaffar Khan had charisma. Gandhi had charisma. I mean, Modi looks so much like the next door neighbor that I treat both with contempt. I don't think we want leaders today. We want everyone to be a lowest common denominator figure. And when Modi says he's a chaiwala, he is the lowest common denominator figure.
Okay. Let me ask you, Santosh, on this whole India story. The India story, the emerging India story has been, the narrative for, I think, ever since my existence. But I think, do you think the narrative might have shifted from India being a land of opportunity for the world, everybody eyeing us, to now a story that a lot of people don't seem to have as much belief in?
Yeah, I think the story that has got a little muddled. I think from a time when it was in a sense, I think, sort of picking up from both what Rama has said and what Shiv has said, there was a time when, there was a kind of a kinder appraisal of India, but also a defeated appraisal, saying, oh, well, game trier, trying hard, not yet kind of delivering, always kind of, underperforming, but always full of promise. That was the sense, a perennial sense around India. And I think what has happened now is that message has got a little mixed because there were certain kind of parts of India that were always, that were tick marks in the West. It's a democracy. It has a certain there is freedom of press. There is a certain, at least stated belief in institutions, whatever the reality on the ground might have been. And I think that message is getting a little muddled. But on the other hand, it's also important to look at it in the larger political sort of a scheme of things, where there are so many countries where you have leaders of the same kind that have emerged simultaneously. So there is a certain section. So if you look at, the New York Times, and you look at that part of the world and that section of the world, certainly India's image has kind of taken a knot. But as you see, much more kind of ethnocentric, much more inward-looking governments which actually find in India a resonance today. So so in a genuine sense, it's a much more muddled picture. It's not as, there was a simple, clear narrative of somebody trying hard and perhaps struggling, but always full of promise. I think it has become much more complex than that. That narrative is no longer as simple.
What do you think are the far-reaching impacts of Hindutva? And you would have to agree that this is a new phenomenon. If you don't, please tell me why. The far-reaching impacts of Hindutva, and do you think Hindutva is here to stay? Is this definitely a new and definite attribute of the new India we live in?
So yes, of course, it's much more ugly. Yes, it is. There are many more trolls. There is much more identity that says I'm a Hindu. But what I am completely confused with is even the idea of what is secular and what is not, right? I just heard a debate the other day where everybody who was standard bearers for secularism said the old secularism was not good. Maybe Shiv can explain this. And the new secularism is non-existent. So, where the heck are we? So Hindutva has me really, really, really confused. Are we to be embarrassed for being Hindu? Are we to beat up on our prime minister for going to a temple? The day he receives an invitation for a masjid and doesn't go, I think we should hang him. But do you beat him up for doing this in the name of Hindutva? I don't know. I'm really confused on this issue. I'm suddenly confused about whether in a college on Convocation Day, if you sing the Saraswati Vandana, are you being religious? And if people are saying, yeah, it's religious, stop it, then that's a completely different definition of Hindutva. So yeah, I am seriously confused.
Santosh, would you like to chime in here and take on Rama?
No, I think I would certainly not argue that everything is the same, and just because we were religious earlier and we are religious now, it's the same, and that there is no difference. This is not just about the Prime Minister going to a temple. That is being disingenuous. This is about the Prime Minister making the building of a temple a central part of a political message, and I don't think the two are kind of contiguous and can be looked at in the same sense. I would agree with the fact that the definition of secularism and the practice of secularism in an earlier time was also in a sense opportunistic and also shallow, and did not come out of a genuine sort of engagement. India is a deeply religious country, and any ideology that does not acknowledge that and does not work with that is bound to be sterile. And I think that was, I think the problem with secularism, that in the form in which it was practiced, it was sterile, and it was used as a weapon more than as a way to actually, and which I think was the central failure of that time, is that you, instead of evangelizing that idea, or instead of it becoming an idea that people owned, it was an idea that people were judged by. I think that's the constant kind of that you call people names. This is regressive, this is that, this is, and then you have a barrage of these adjectives that you use. So I do think that there were, flaws, and that there was a voice, which was a real voice, which was not given room to express itself. And that voice today is expressing itself, perhaps with greater force, getting politically kind of used, but certainly it comes from a certain felt kind of a sense of, being aggrieved. I certainly think it's true. And there is that element of truth in the voice today. And I think it is now found political leverage, and you found some very skilled practitioners who understand what works today and are using it they're elected representatives of the country. I mean, they go through a perfectly kind of a democratic process. So I think that's, and it is an important part of today and the future. I think there's absolutely no running away from.
Shiv, 73 years, have we regressed or have we evolved? What would you say?
See, I think we have moved on in certain ways. We are more modernized, we are more Western, we are more ideological. But I think what really sustained us was our confusions, our pluralism. The more pluralistic and the more confused we are, the more democratic we'll be. The danger is, as we become more logical and analytical, we lose our democracy.
Okay, fair enough. Santosh, your view on, are we on the path of regression or evolution? And, how do you envisage our next 5 years?
I think we want to evolve by very consciously regressing. So, I mean, so in a sense, it's almost like you want to embrace, a version of the past, and to feed off the energy that gives you in order to propel yourself into the future. So your view of the future rests on a certain, you're trying to transform the past, use it as fuel to create energy that sustains you for the future. So to that extent, I think it's an interesting time when the meaning of the future rests so heavily on a version of the past, which is what actually we are seeing today. And then you're trying to harness a certain national imagination and to shepherd it towards a direction by characterizing the past in a new way, and therefore understanding and experiencing the past not through actual memory, but through a certain, almost through a version that we want to believe in. And I think that is the political project of the day. And certainly the desire is to move forward. I mean, the desire is not to move to the past, but I think the energy comes from a version of the past.
I'll let you have the last word, Rama.
So are we giving more people a better life than we did before? Yes. Are we realizing that there are more people who don't have as good lives? The whole purpose of GDP growth or whatever, as Amartya Sen said, is to give people a valued and valuable life. And are we cognizant of that? Are we moving towards that? I think we are.
Let me stop you there for a moment. Are we really? Because 2016 onwards,
are we moving towards giving people a better life in terms of more food to eat, in terms of getting bailed out when you are in the lowest 20%, in terms of, at least on paper, whatever rights you can get, and making it happen in terms of direct benefit transfers? I think absolutely yes. I mean, these may be minor victories, but on the other hand, they're not. So if you look at physical inclusion, if you look at development as in a modern welfare state, if you look at it in terms of not having to beg the sarpanch to get the money that is due to you, I certainly think things are moving forward.
Fair enough. On that note, thank you, three of you. Thank you for being so candid. Thank you for speaking your mind. And hopefully the journey ahead is going to be hopeful and a path that would embrace old secularism. Thank you so much. Thanks once again.